Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Lane Lee, owner of Coach Lain LLC. I'm a mental performance and tumbling technique specialist working with cheerleading athletes around the world, helping them to grow in their understanding, gain confidence and self-awareness, and ultimately, at the end of the day, outperform their greatest fears. I came from the design world back into the cheer world, and I say back because I grew up as a cheerleader and cheer coach myself from I think the age 14 to about 22. And then I also had about 10 years under my belt as a cheerleading coach back in the day for All-Star Cheer. I took a break because I wanted to pursue a career in graphic design. So I became a freelance graphic designer working from about 2010, 2011, all the way up through 2017. And during that time, I was blessed to work with such companies as Target, Microsoft, and Hasbro. It was an amazing time, but I was feeling unfulfilled at the end of the day. So I decided to go back into the cheer world, and in doing so, I said, you know what? I want to make sure that I feel fulfilled and that I'm adding value to people's lives. So I decided to start my own company instead of going to work for a school or an all-star gym so that I could do things on my terms, the way that I wanted to do them. When I came back, I noticed a commonality between the two industries, between graphic design or creative industries and cheerleading. Mental blocks. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, right? Because if you're a creative person, then you experience creative blocks all the time. And if you're a cheerleader, then you're using the term mental blocks all the time, which is so annoying, but we'll get into that later. But in trying to examine and better understand this commonality, it started me on a journey of understanding that led me down a path of passion, of understanding in a greater sense what fear is and how it relates to all of us. How are mental blocks and fear connected? How can I better help everyday people understand and ultimately outperform fears? So when Dwight asked me to speak for R.E.A.L Manhood 2022, of course, I immediately knew exactly what I wanted to talk to you about today: fear and manhood. In an effort to better dissect this concept, we're gonna have to break it down into three parts. Number one, what even is fear? Number two, fear and its role in masculinity. And number three, vulnerability and how it affects both fear and manhood. Let's get started. So number one, what is fear? Man, this is something I talk about all the time. If you follow me on social media, you see me posting about this regularly. Every time I do a live, this is something I end up talking about. I also talk about it on my podcast, Fearless University. The first is biological fear. This is the fear that is imprinted on our DNA. This is the fear that came with us evolving as humans. This is a fear that is a response to a clear and present danger. So for example, somebody holding a gun to your face, or a mountain lion chasing you down the street, or you're parachuting and your chute doesn't deploy. These are all really morbid examples, but very pertinent. This is what biological fear is. The one takeaway that is super important about biological fear is that it always moves us to action. There's an example I always use. I saw something on social media a number of years ago. It was CCTV footage, right, of these two young children in India. All of a sudden, a couple of junkyard dogs or slum dogs come out and surround them, start barking at them. The young girl runs off around the corner, leaving the boy by himself. And the boy, who very easily could have run as well, decided to start swinging at the dogs to fend them off, right? Now, what you just heard was that the girl ran off and that the boy stood his ground. That's the idea of fear that you have been fed, spoon-fed since a very early age in America, as a male in America. What your male brain just heard was that the boy stood his ground because boys are brave, and the girl ran off because girls get scared. No. Here's the thing about biological fear. I said it already, but make sure you caught it. Biological fear always moves us to action. The biggest misconception about the fight or flight response is that fight means that you are brave and flight or fleeing means that you are weak or cowardly. When in fact, Both responses are actions. So if you decide to flee, that's an action. If you decide to stay and fight, that's an action. I posted a video on my TikTok explaining this, and in the background, I was using footage of the running of the bulls or people getting chased by wild animals, right? Just because you're fleeing doesn't mean that you're cowardly. And it's a concept you really need to let go of if you are to embrace healthy, vulnerable masculinity. The second type of fear, the most common fear that we all experience on a regular daily basis, is psychological fear. Psychological fear is a response to discomfort. It's irrational. It's the fear that your brain conjures and the lies that it creates to talk you out of an intended course of action because it deems it unsafe, uncomfortable, or unworthy of you taking a risk. And just like biological fear always moves us to action, psychological fear always causes paralysis. Irrational psychological fear defies logic. It is based in anti-rational thought because your brain is simply reacting to the discomfort of a new situation, of an uncomfortable encounter, something that it is not used to. And so your brain is trying to desperately get you back to a place where it feels you are safe. So why then do people want so badly to get rid of fear? Because facing fear requires discomfort, and the brain hates discomfort. It also requires vulnerability, which itself requires a tremendous deal of discomfort. Instead of dealing with the discomfort of facing our fears, we would much rather cling to the idea that we can conquer or defeat our fears. Or even worse, we come up with a reason why we should excuse our fears or come up with some rational reasoning for our fears, instead of trying to truly understand the origin, the why behind our fear, and what it's actually trying to tell us. Fear is not the problem, young kings. It is our response to fear, our discomfort in dealing with, and our reaction to it. That's the problem, and it leads to so many missed opportunities in life. If you want success, growth, true happiness, true love, if you want to embrace the greatness you were designed for, you must learn to get comfortable with discomfort, period. Number 2, fear in the role of masculinity. We've already talked at length about how fear is a direct response to what? That's right, discomfort. This is why most of us fail at trying new or different things. New and different is uncomfortable. And instead of allowing us to experience that discomfort uninterrupted, our brains immediately seek out a place of comfort as to avoid mental, physical, or emotional distress. So more specifically, Coach Lain, what role does fear play in masculinity? I'm actually glad you asked, because the most destructive word, the most destructive idea to masculinity is fearlessness and the idea of being fearless. If you look up the etymology of the word fearless, it actually has roots in 16th century Europe. That's a time of fable and sword, right? Where jesters and sages were entertaining kings and queens, regaling them with larger than life tales of heroicism and fantasy, talking about these larger than life figures just oozing with masculinity, who were fearless in the face of danger. You know, you don't want to hear a tale about Bob the hunter who goes into the forest and gets eaten by a black bear. No, that's not exciting. You want to hear about Bob the hunter, hopefully his name isn't Bob, but you want to hear about Bob the hunter going into the forest, the dark forest, fearless, brave, bold, ready to fight, take on whatever comes his way, right? That's way more exciting to listen to. But this idea of fearlessness, of being fearless, is actually a cancer to your confidence, your performance, and your manhood. No one is fearless. Biologically, we need fear to alert us of clear and present dangers. This is our evolutionary fear. This is the fear that we've developed a strong understanding of because it's ingrained in our DNA. It lets us know when it's time to bounce. Psychologically, however, we need fear to let us know when we've grown too comfortable and when we once again need to step outside of our comfort zones into our discomfort zones to level up. Fear is not the problem. Are you catching on yet? Our relationship with it, our discomfort with it, our reaction to it, our understanding of it. That's the problem. To put this in a bit more of context, I want to talk about anger. Dr. Gary Chapman, author and inventor of the 5 love languages, also wrote a book on anger, in which he outlines 2 main types of anger. The first he calls godly anger, or the anger that we experience when we've witnessed an injustice. This is the anger that arises out of people doing wrong or getting over on you because they've done you wrong or dirty. This could be someone getting mugged or bullied. This could be Black Lives Matter. This could be the racial and socioeconomic prejudices and injustices that we witness on the news every single day. The second type, however, stems from expectations not being met, which almost always happens from a lack of communication. If we don't communicate our expectations to each other, to our friends, our teachers, our coaches, our parents, our loved ones, our partners, how can we expect them, the expectations, to be met correctly? And as we all know, real communication, effective communication, requires vulnerability. I never knew that I had a problem with vulnerability until my wife started pointing out how sensitive I was. Now, this was before we got married. This is when we were still dating, and I think we were engaged. I think to men, hearing that you're sensitive implies that you're weak, effeminate, or not in control of your own emotions, which is funny because a lot of us aren't in control of our own emotions because our culture doesn't encourage us to express our emotions. Therefore, we suppress them, making them more unruly, more volatile, making them more prone to explosion. What's weird is that I was never told these things. They were associations that I pick up from pop culture, from TV, from movies, from music, from role models and mentors and other guys that I looked up to in my day-to-day life. It got to the point where I was starting arguments with her over this, all because I didn't understand what being called sensitive meant, not to me, but about me. And it wasn't until she finally explained what she meant by it that my understanding started to shift. She told me that she grew up around many men and boys who all shared the same problem. They puff up their chests and act like the alpha all the time, never embracing their own sensitive sides and allowing themselves to be emotionally vulnerable. But she had seen that quality in me, and to her, it was refreshing. So when she called me sensitive, it wasn't a dig or an insult. It was a compliment. Here's where all of this is going. I was raised by a very loving father. He's a man who would always kiss us and hug us, tell us how much he loved us, how proud he was of us. To this day, he still calls me almost daily to say all those same things. You know, I learned what sensitive masculinity was from him. But it wasn't until a few years ago where I realized I knew nothing about the state of my dad's emotional or mental health. Because see, every time I would call dad or sit down to talk with him and ask him how he was doing, he would respond with what he was doing. See, to my dad, being emotionally vulnerable was very difficult because it was something he never grew up with an example of. He was never taught that there was discomfort in vulnerability. And he grew up in a time where you had to be a manly man to be a man. But even still, I found myself being a much more sensitive version of my father and realized that when I'd have outbursts of anger, either during an argument or on a bad day, it was because I lacked understanding. It was because I didn't allow myself to be emotionally vulnerable. It was because I was fighting my natural self, the part of me, the part that I believe exists in all of us, to be honest, that wanted to share how I was feeling, not just what I was doing. But I was keeping him inside, out of fear, out of the discomfort of being judged, and embracing this updated idea of what a sensitive male looks and acts like. Now, I wear the term sensitive male as a badge of honor because one, I know that it's something that is really hard to come by in this day and age. But it's also something I embrace to show young kings like you that emotional vulnerability is okay, that it's a part of healthy, reliable, mature manhood. That although it's something that you may not see or experience on a daily basis, it exists in the world. You can find and interact with other guys who are okay with the idea of being in touch with their more sensitive side. In summation, young kings, I want to leave you guys with this. True manhood embraces fear and uses it to dictate what their next move is going to be, what that next level that they're going to achieve is going to be. True manhood questions comfort and explores discomforts, because the only way you're going to grow, succeed, and level up is by thriving in your discomfort zone. And finally, true manhood encourages vulnerability. It allows you to let down that guard, that hardened exterior that you've developed either from life experience or just watching other hardened men in your life not share, not feel, not emote. Break that down. Let people in. Let yourself out. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel. It's okay to have bad days. It's okay to feel weak. You're not a superhero. You're human. We all are. If you ever want to reach out to me, hit me up. Let me know how you're doing. Let me know that you're having a bad day. Whatever it is, I'm here to help. You can DM me on Instagram or TikTok. I'm at Coach Lain everywhere. I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. And I'll catch you on the flip.